When we left the restaurant, she held my hand tightly, as if the touch was a silent apology, as if the intertwined fingers could prepare my chest for what was to come. The red dress still shone under the streetlight on the damp sidewalk, the lipstick impeccable, the smile a little crooked. I smiled too. She stopped, turned to me with slightly teary eyes, and said what I will never forget, "Honey, I need to confess something." My heart froze. In the next second, the word betrayal hung in the air like a poison about to fall. And it fell. Every syllable that left her mouth ate at my insides like acid. The world stopped. The car, the noise of the city, the waiter still watching us from the restaurant door, everything went silent. She betrayed me. Not once, not twice, but several times. And there, facing me, with the practiced coldness of someone who already knew exactly what to say, she tried to convince me that what she had done was necessary, that there was love, but something was missing. That it was time, boredom, routine that was to blame. That she needed to live. And that didn't change how he felt about me. The cynicism almost made me laugh. But my face didn't react. It was as if he was anesthetized. Only my eyes screamed. I stood there, still, listening, absorbing every drop of the lie. I didn't cry. Not at that moment. Something inside me broke so silently that to this day I couldn't hear the snap. The confession was not accompanied by repentance. It was more of a formality. She wanted, in some twisted way, to be honest after the lie. A last attempt to save what, in her mind, could still be saved. But all I saw was a burning field. And inside me, in that silence, I prepared my revenge. Because betrayal didn't destroy me. She woke me up. It lit me up. It gave me back something that had been dormant for a long time, my dignity. For days, I relived that night. I saw the red dress, the waiter, her reflection in the car window, the dry kiss she tried to give me before entering the house, as if she hadn't just destroyed everything we'd built. And in the following days, I saw her routine return to normal. I saw smiles. I saw hidden connections. I saw poor disguises and repeated excuses. But I didn't say anything. I pretended to digest it. That he accepted. Which was processing. And it was in this silence that I built my revenge, piece by piece, gesture by gesture. She had no idea that, while giving me fake smiles at breakfast, I was articulating the exact moment when I would bring everything down. And it wouldn't be with screams, it wouldn't be with tears, it wouldn't be with scandal. It would be classy. With control. With surgical precision. I let her believe everything was fine. I was affectionate. I made plans. I proposed trips. I courted her again. It was a new me. The perfect husband. The renewed man. And she believed. Because it's easy to fool those who think they have control. I booked a special dinner. I invited her whole family. Brothers, parents, cousins, nephews. All those who saw us as a model couple. I reserved an entire room just for us. I chose the most elegant restaurant in the city. I prepared a video. A speech. A soundtrack. I bought a new ring. I organized everything with the patience of someone who savors every detail of the last act. Her expectations grew by the minute. He's going to ask me to marry him again, she said to her friends. After all, he still loves me. She truly believed she had won. That his confession had become a turning point. That his mistake had been forgiven. And I fed that belief with everything I had. That night, when everyone was settled, I stood up with the microphone in hand. She looked at me with a sparkle in her eyes. She was sitting next to me, wearing an even more provocative dress, her smile even wider. I started talking about love, about time, about forgiveness, about reconstruction. I spoke about the difficulties of life as a couple, about how many couples get lost along the way. And everyone shook their heads, excited. I saw tears from some aunts, smiles from friends. She squeezed my hand tightly, excited. And then, the waiter turned off the lights. On the screen, the video appeared. She laughed, thinking it was our retrospective. But what came was very different. It was her messages with her lover. The photos. The audios. The laughs. The phrases that made me lose sleep. The "don't tell him," the "he doesn't even suspect," the "it was the best night of my life." With each image, the surrounding faces transformed. Hers, pale. Breathing quickened. Her hand let go of mine. Her eyes started to water, but there was no more time for tears. I continued standing, motionless, looking at everyone. Nobody said a word. And when the video ended, I took a deep breath and concluded, this was her secret. And that is the reason why, today, I say goodbye to this marriage, not with pain, but with freedom. Applause did not come. Neither was the case. The silence was enough. She left the table without looking back. Parents, shocked. The brothers, eyes fixed on the plate. And I just sat down, ordered my wine, and ate my dinner in peace. That night, she lost everything. Not just the husband. He lost his mask, he lost his respect, he lost his narrative. And what no one knew yet was that that dinner was just the beginning. What came after that would make every word she said sound even more ridiculous. Because there are betrayals that hurt, but there are revenge that heal. And that night, my healing began. But what she didn't imagine, what no one would ever imagine, is what I prepared for the next day. And that's when everything turns around. That everything changes. Because the pain of betrayal has layers that no one sees, until someone decides to show them all. One by one. And maybe, just maybe, she'll discover that she lost a lot more than she thought, and that the ending isn't what she imagined. After all, what happens to someone who destroys a home, thinking the other person will forgive? Do you really want to know? So wait until you find out what was actually announced that night. Because the real shock is yet to come. Welcome to the channel where painful truths are heard. Here, we do not support, never, no kind of betrayal. All the stories are fictional, but they reflect realities that destroy homes, hearts and lives. Our objective is clear, to show that every choice has consequences, and that cheating is never worth it. Get ready. What you will hear now is intense, realistic, and shocking. Good story. In the eyes of those observing from the outside, Daniel and Helena were the portrait of an admirable couple. The two met at a young age, when life had barely begun to take on seriousness, and love appeared with that freshness of infinite promises. He, a meticulous architect and passionate about forms, had the habit of seeing poetry even in concrete. She, a literature teacher, spoke with her eyes as she read aloud poems that no one else seemed to listen to with such attention. The connection between them was not immediate like in impulsive romances, but grew silently, watered by mutual respect, small admirations and a calm commitment, like a house built little by little, brick by brick. They lived in a large house, surrounded by a garden that Helena insisted on keeping flourishing, and that Daniel had designed with pride down to the smallest details. Every corner of that house seemed to hold part of their history, and, for a long time, everything there seemed too solid to collapse. During the first years of marriage, Helena dedicated herself almost exclusively to the house and teaching. Daniel, in turn, immersed himself more and more in projects, always with short deadlines and demanding clients. But still, even amid tiredness and routines, they found time for each other. They had their rituals, breakfast on the porch on Sundays, movie nights with cheap wine during the week, goodnight kisses that, even though they were rushed, never failed to happen. They were small details, but for them, they supported the feeling. As the years went by, the gestures became more automatic, the words less frequent, but there was still an unspoken pact of permanence. Neither of them seemed willing to break that bond that, although frayed in parts, was still maintained because of everything they had built together. Daniel's work had begun to demand more of him as he gained renown in his field. He designed luxurious homes for clients who wanted not just homes, but status symbols. He spent entire days in meetings, traveling to visit construction sites in other cities, and when he arrived home, his tired look revealed that something inside him was also running out. Helena noticed his absence, not just physically, but emotionally. Sometimes I called him for dinner 3 times until he turned off the computer. Other times, he would spend the entire weekend locked in the office assembling models and reviewing plans. But she didn't charge. I had learned, throughout the marriage, to accept certain phases. I preferred to believe that it was just that, a phase. She continued taking care of the house, the plants, the students and her husband with the same silent delicacy. She never stopped preparing his favorite dishes on special occasions, nor leaving loving notes on the mornings he left before waking up. Helena had stopped teaching face-to-face classes when the school where she worked opted for a new teaching model, but she continued to teach free courses and creative writing workshops for adults at a local library. I liked hearing stories from others, encouraging forgotten dreams. There, he felt useful in a different way. She was admired by people who barely knew her, and perhaps that's why she felt a constant nostalgia for something she couldn't name. Sometimes she walked alone through the streets of the neighborhood with a book under her arm, as if looking for something in unfamiliar faces. I missed talking about feelings, being listened to without rushing, smiling for new reasons. But he never felt entitled to complain. After all, his life wasn't bad. She was healthy, a beautiful house, a hard-working husband and a predictable routine. The people around her envied her in silence, and that was enough to silence any anguish that occasionally arose deep in her chest. On their wedding anniversaries, they still exchanged gifts. Simple, symbolic. Daniel used to write cards with messages that seemed like they were taken from old movies. Helena kept them in a box at the back of the closet, along with some old photographs and a letter he had given her on the day of his marriage proposal. Deep down, she was too romantic to accept that love gets old. He believed that everything could be revived if there was a will. He believed in new beginnings. That's why he never thought about giving up. I preferred to blame the weather, tiredness, the modern world. Everything but them. The last trip they took together was to an inn in the mountains, on a cold weekend. Daniel spent much of his time on the phone, resolving an issue with the construction company's team, while Helena walked around the surroundings with a blanket over her shoulders and her eyes lost in the mountains. They slept hugging each other both nights, but exchanged few words. When they returned home, he received a proposal to expand the company, and dinners became even quieter. Even so, she proposed a special dinner. Just the 2 of us, like in the beginning. He accepted immediately, which surprised her. He spent the entire week planning the details, the reservation at the restaurant he liked, the dress he would wear, the music he would play in the car. I wanted to see him smile. She wanted, once again, to feel chosen. Daniel, on the other hand, lived that week strangely. He noticed a tiredness in himself that went beyond the physical. An emotional tiredness, as if you were in a marriage where the roles were so well defined that there was no longer room for improvisation. He knew that Helena deserved more than his constant absence, but he didn't know how to go back to being the man she needed. Sometimes I watched her reading silently on the porch and thought about how life had changed. He missed her, but he didn't know how to get closer without seeming forced. Therefore, he accepted dinner without hesitation. Maybe this was the time to rekindle something. The restaurant was beautiful, lit by candles and light curtains that danced in the wind. Helena smiled when she saw him waiting at the table, dressed neatly, in a suit he rarely wore. The waiter brought their favorite wine, and for a few minutes, it was as if nothing had changed. They laughed at old stories, commented on mutual acquaintances, talked about their niece's plans to get married soon. She seemed happy, and he pretended well. But there was something in Daniel's eyes that not even the soft light could disguise. A subtle distance, a calculated hesitation between words. Helena, however, stuck to the gestures. To the wine, to the dessert he ordered without her needing to remember. The kiss on the forehead as they left the restaurant. On the way back, they talked about movies, books and the idea of traveling again. She seemed excited, and he responded with a half smile. They stopped in front of the house, and there, under the streetlight and with the car still running, she held his hand. The night was perfect. The scenery too. It was then that, with her eyes fixed on his, she took a deep breath and said, "Honey, I need to confess something." But there, at that moment, time stopped, and what came next, would change everything. The silence between the two after Helena's sentence didn't last more than a few seconds, but in that tenuous interval, something inside Daniel was reconfigured. The world he knew, the one he had built with so much care, was beginning to crack in places he didn't even know existed. Her hand still held his, as if trying to stop his imminent fall, but her eyes no longer held the same shine. There was a weight to them. A request for forgiveness in advance, and something more difficult to decipher, perhaps fear, perhaps shame. He didn't respond right away. He just nodded, in a gesture that could mean anything, and she took it as permission. The drive home was quiet, the headlights illuminating an asphalt that already seemed more distant, as if it belonged to another reality. They entered without saying a word. Helena went up to the bedroom, took off her earrings with slow movements, and Daniel remained in the room, looking at the reflection of his own image in the window glass. During the night, sleep did not come. Helena's body rested on the other side of the bed, facing away, and Daniel heard the sound of her breathing as if each sigh pushed the memory of that phrase back into him. That incomplete confession, interrupted by a moment of hesitation and followed by, "We'd better talk tomorrow." But he already knew. Maybe not the details, maybe not the extent, but he knew. There are sensations that do not require confirmation. What was once a brief suspicion, an uncomfortable thought that he repressed before it became real, was now a concrete presence in the room. The touch had changed, the kiss had lost its temperature. Small changes that he wanted to ignore, that he disguised with the rush of everyday life, now lined up like pieces of a cruel puzzle. At breakfast, Helena avoided his gaze, commented on the weather, on an activity in the library, as if she could return to normality with small steps. Daniel responded with the same passive coldness, but inside, his stomach turned with each spoonful of the tasteless yogurt he swallowed just to maintain the routine. During the day, he tried to work, but the plant lines got jumbled. His concentration slipped, the phone rang and he let it ring. I would go for a walk, come back, turn on the computer, turn it off. At night, dinner followed the same script, neutral words, shy smiles and shouting silences. And so the following days went. A succession of mechanical gestures, as if both were waiting for the right moment to open the wound completely. The following week, Helena arrived later than usual. He said he had been talking to a friend from the book club. Daniel pretended not to notice the more pronounced makeup, the different perfume, the embarrassed smile when he waited for her in the room. He had already started to pick up the pieces, but now he was looking at them more closely. Her cell phone always facing down on the table, the frequency with which she checked her messages, her long showers and her evasive responses. He was not a paranoid man, never had been. He trusted people, especially her. But now, every gesture carried too much weight to ignore. I didn't say anything. Didn't confront. I wanted to hear it from her mouth. I needed that. Until she arranged a conversation herself. One sunny Sunday, while he was taking care of the plants in the garden, Helena approached him with a delicacy that seemed to apologize before she even opened her mouth. He said he needed to tell something. Something that, according to her, had consumed her for months. Daniel sat on the wooden bench, dried his hands on the cloth and looked at her with the calm of someone who already knew that the ground was about to give way. Was an old acquaintance. She hesitated for long seconds. He said he didn't want to hurt him, that he never imagined it would come to this. That everything happened unexpectedly, that you didn't plan, that you didn't seek. That life sometimes pushes people to strange places. Daniel listened in silence, his breathing contained, his eyes fixed on some point behind her. And then it came. The exact words. She had met someone. It was recent, not very serious, but it happened. An exchange of messages that evolved, one meeting, then another, then the inevitable. It was just once, she said, but her eyes lied. Or maybe they really believed that just once was less serious. That reducing the number could lessen the impact. She talked about confusion, about lack, about how routine swallowed them. He said he didn't want to lose what they had, that he still loved him, but that he had lost himself for a moment. That she was sorry. That I didn't know how to fix. Daniel didn't get up. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. I just said I needed time. He returned to the garden and continued watering the plants. As the water fell on the leaves, he felt his emotions mix, anger, sadness, disbelief. But there was something more, an emerging coldness. A part of him that woke up after being asleep for a long time. A part that didn't just want to understand, but to make people understand. Over the next few days, he became emotionally withdrawn. He maintained the tone, the gestures, the routine. But inside him, a plan began to emerge. It would not be an ordinary revenge. There would be no shouting or slamming doors. It would have to wait. Calculate. And when the moment came, he would know exactly what to do. Helena, on the other hand, felt the weight of his silence like a constant punishment. I tried to start a conversation, cook my favorite dishes, resume small gestures, but everything seemed to come up against an invisible wall. The calm and dedicated man with whom he had shared the last few years now seemed like a shadow of himself. It wasn't explicit anger, but a type of indifference that hurts more than any offense. When he proposed dinner a few weeks later, Helena saw it as a sign of hope. The invitation came with a soft, almost rehearsed smile. He said he wanted to talk, start over. That I missed it. That maybe there was still a chance for both of them. She accepted with teary eyes, not knowing that this dinner would not be a new beginning, but the beginning of the end. Daniel took care of all the details. You booked the most elegant room in a well-known restaurant. She invited close friends, her family, parents, brothers, cousins. He asked them not to reveal anything, he just said that he wanted to do something special for Helena. Chose a new ring. Wrote a speech. Prepared images. Meanwhile, she chose her dress, her perfume, she dreamed of the possibility of renewing her vows, of a new chapter. I thought the pain was gone. That love was enough to rebuild. But Daniel wasn't planning a fresh start. He had designed, in minute detail, the moment when he would give her back everything he had received, with interest. And now, with the room prepared, the guests seated and anticipation hanging in the air, she smiled. I believed I was about to experience a memorable night. But not even in her worst thoughts did she imagine what was about to be revealed. Because until that moment, she thought the betrayal had remained between them. That the words spoken in the garden had been buried. I didn't know anyone had listened more than they should have. And I had no idea that all of that, every gesture, every smile of his in the last few weeks, was part of something much bigger. Something that would completely change the course of their lives. Something that, finally, was about to begin. Ambient music created a soft, elegant atmosphere in the private ballroom as guests sipped Daniel's chosen wine and eagerly awaited what he had promised would be a special announcement. Helena, radiant, wore a dark blue dress that highlighted her slender shoulders and delicately perfumed neck. Her eyes searched his expectantly, and he calmly maintained the serene posture of someone who dominated every second of the show. It was impossible to suspect that, behind the gentle smile and calm voice with which she greeted her family, there was a meticulously contained hurricane, ready to be released with surgical precision. He had mentally rehearsed every gesture, every word. The moment was about to begin. Daniel stood up, holding his glass of wine as tightly as he had held each of the decisions he had made over the past few weeks. The hall fell silent almost instantly, gazes turning to him with the typical expectation of celebration announcements. He walked to the small improvised stage with the confidence of someone appearing before a jury that was completely unaware of the content of his complaint. Helena smiled, touching the ring he had discreetly left on the table napkin. I believed, with all certainty, that I was about to experience a definitive request for forgiveness, perhaps a public reconciliation, a reaffirmation of love. But when he picked up the microphone and let out a restrained sigh, an almost imperceptible discomfort coursed through his body. She couldn't say why, but something about his posture made her spine run cold. Daniel started talking about meetings, about the chance that brings two people together and transforms their lives with a simple look. He spoke about the years of marriage, about achievements, about shared dreams and difficulties faced. He mentioned the importance of building a life together and how rare it is to find someone willing to stay, even on cloudy days. The guests smiled, nodded their heads in agreement, some even got emotional. Helena felt her heart racing, her eyes moist, her chest tight. She was convinced that he had forgiven her, that speech was a gift, a declaration. But then, something changed in his tone. The voice remained firm, but the words began to take on a different temperature. Daniel started talking about choices, about paths that cross paths with others in moments of doubt. He said that sometimes mistakes are not born from evil, but from weakness. That repentance is not always enough. And then, slowly, his eyes met hers. The hall fell into a dense, heavy silence. On the screen behind him, which had been unlit until then, an image suddenly appeared. An exchange of messages projected in large letters. Helena instinctively turned her face to what appeared. He recognized the texts themselves. The emojis. The words you never imagined would be revealed. A buzz began to form among the guests, and her heart raced as if it wanted to escape her chest. She tried to get up, but Daniel subtly raised his hand, asking her to wait. The images continued. Prints of conversations with name and time. Photos. Short audios that echoed around the room like stabs. A laugh from her. He'll never know. It's just once. I just need to feel like I'm still wanted. The reaction of those present was a mix of disbelief and embarrassment. Helena's parents had their eyes wide open, her sister covered her mouth with her hand, her cousins exchanged uneasy glances. She was paralyzed. Every second was torture, each new revelation deepened the ground beneath her feet. Daniel remained standing, unfazed. He said that for a long time he had questioned whether he should just move on, silence the pain, preserve the family's image. But he concluded that silence would be condoning the lie. And that night, more than about betrayal, was about truth. About showing that those who hurt need, at least once, to face their own exposed wounds. He said he loved Helena, or that he had, but that he couldn't keep pretending. And then, as calmly as he began, he announced the end. He stated that from that night onwards, they would no longer be a couple. And he hoped that she would use the silent applause that she had always received throughout her life to get back on her feet, alone. The humiliation was complete. She stood up, staggering, trying to explain herself, searching for words that didn't come. She said it wasn't as it seemed, that he didn't understand, that she was confused. But no one listened to her anymore. The looks from before, full of admiration, now avoided hers. And it was then that, with a trembling voice and burning eyes, she asked him why he did it that way. And Daniel, still in front of everyone, smiled for the first time. A subtle, firm, almost gentle smile. He said there was something no one there knew. Something that justified every second of that night. And if she thought that was the most painful part, she still didn't understand what was coming. He said he didn't do it out of anger, but out of justice. That what she was about to reveal would change not only the way everyone saw her, but also the place she herself held in their story. And that was just the beginning. Helena remained motionless. I wanted to scream, but I had no strength. His chest heaved, his face burned. The hall, once the scene of a celebration, was now a court. And she, without realizing it, was about to be judged for something she didn't even know had been discovered. The secret, the real one, was still hidden. But Daniel's silence said it all. He knew. He knew more than she imagined. She knew things that could bring her down for good. And in the middle of it all, as he walked off the stage and the guests began to murmur more audibly, she realized. Dinner wasn't about love. It was about revealing. But not everything. Not yet. Because the final blow was still in store. And it would definitely be the most devastating. The last guests began to leave in silence, looking away as they passed Helena, as if her embarrassment were contagious. The lights in the room had already been partially turned off, leaving only the soft beams that cut through the environment with an almost cinematic melancholy. The waiter collected glasses of wine that were still half full, while Daniel remained standing by the door, observing everything with a calm that bordered on cruel. Helena didn't move. She continued to sit at the table, her hands on her lap, her eyes fixed on nothing, as if she was trying to absorb everything that had just happened without letting the pain overflow. I couldn't. She had been ripped from reality itself with elegant brutality. And even now, after the public humiliation, what tormented her most was his subdued tone. The absence of screams, of confrontations. The coldness with which he had said goodbye, not with hatred, but with lucidity. It destroyed her inside in a way she couldn't translate. When the room was completely empty, Daniel approached the table and placed a small key on the napkin that still remained next to her plate. Helena's gaze met his for the first time in hours. She tried to say something, but her lips trembled. He took a deep breath before speaking. He said the key was from the suitcase he had left in the guest room, where he had slept the last few days. I was leaving that night. And that he didn't need her to say anything. No more. Everything he needed to hear, he had already heard. But there was still one last thing. A pending issue. And this pending issue, according to him, was the reason why she wouldn't be able to sleep for the next few weeks. Helena followed him with her gaze, but didn't stop him from going. She knew there was no point. Daniel wasn't the type to back down once he'd made up his mind. And in that moment, more than anything, she wanted to know what he knew. What was the pending issue that he had left up in the air? Because the fear I felt didn't come from what had been revealed that night, but from what was yet to come. Hours later, Helena wandered around the house like a wandering soul. The makeup smeared, the dress out of place, the shoes abandoned in the middle of the room. She felt strange in her own body. In your own home. Every corner of the house felt charged with judgment. The walls, silent, seemed to echo each of the phrases spoken by Daniel. In the room, on the bed, was the suitcase he had mentioned. And next to it, a letter. Handwritten, in his unmistakable handwriting. She hesitated before opening it. He felt the paper burn in his fingers before he even read the first line. When he finally worked up the courage, the content wasn't extensive, but each word carried the weight of a sentence. He said he didn't want to destroy his life, but he also could no longer protect someone who chose to hurt him so coldly. He said it was not about revenge, but about justice. And that, in the coming days, she would understand exactly what he meant. The next day, Helena woke up to the phone ringing insistently. It was her sister, who had gone to her mother's house and found everyone talking about the dinner video. He said that everything was a mess, that the parents couldn't understand what was happening, that they had received messages from acquaintances, comments in family groups. Someone had leaked the video. Someone filmed it, posted it, and within hours, the story was spreading through social circles like wildfire. Helena tried to justify, tried to control the situation, but her voice was shaking too much. She hung up and stood in the kitchen, with the phone still in her hand. My head was spinning, my stomach was turning. She felt like a cornered animal. Then, the doorbell rang. He was a bailiff. He handed her a sealed envelope with the calmness of someone who repeats that gesture dozens of times a day. A request for divorce. Helena didn't cry. She just stood there, staring at the paper with the feeling that this was the final nail in the coffin of everything she had built. But there was something strange about the document. It wasn't just the divorce. It was the way it had been filed, the annexes, the terms. One of them caught his attention. It was an additional clause that dealt with testamentary exclusion of the conjugal part due to serious breach of trust. And it was then that he understood. Daniel had changed the will. He had excluded any benefit from it. More than that, he had made a point of publicly registering the cause. She felt her legs give out and had to lean on the counter. It wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of a much more painful exposure. On the same day, Helena received a message from an unknown number. Just a link, followed by the phrase, "You better see it before everyone else sees it." When he clicked, the video began with Daniel in front of a camera, in a sober setting. He said he needed to tell a story. And it counted. It told everything. About marriage, about the love he felt, about betrayal. About how he discovered everything. And, at the end, he talked about the announcement he had made at dinner. But he said that, even after all that, there was still something that no one knew. That it was time to reveal the real reason behind that night. And then he told the secret. The video cut to a recording made in his lawyer's office. Daniel, next to the professional, read an excerpt from the New Testament. In it, he explained that, weeks before the dinner, he had received a proposal from an international developer to buy the project he had developed over the years. An urban concept that could yield millions. The sale was closed, silently, and the amount received was transferred in full to a foundation to support women victims of emotional violence, created in the name of Daniel's mother, who had suffered from infidelity on the part of her father throughout her life. He said he preferred to transform his pain into something useful, into something that had purpose. And that, by removing Helena from everything, he left her the chance to rebuild herself. Helena sat down on the sofa, without strength. His words hurt more than any scream. She didn't know what hurt her more, having been exposed, left, or having discovered that the man she betrayed, who she felt manipulated, had devised such refined justice. Daniel didn't just want to leave her. He wanted to leave her with a clear conscience and her dignity intact. In your own way. He had freed her, but with a price. A very high price. And she knew, at that moment, that she would never be able to reverse that. The respect he lost. Family support. The love of a man who chose not to take revenge with destruction, but with truth and silence. That night, while the house remained silent, Helena reread the letter he had left. At the end, there was a single sentence that she hadn't noticed before. Love, when it dies, does not ask for revenge, only justice. And peace. And there, alone, with the lights off and her heart torn apart, she understood what he meant. The betrayal she committed didn't just take away her husband. He took away the mirror where she could see who she was. And now, all that was left for him was to face the real reflection, that of a woman who destroyed everything for so little. The video continued to circulate. But for Daniel, the story was over. He was in another city, staying in a discreet chalet, retracing the steps of an old trip. Alone, yes. But in peace. He no longer carried anger. I no longer felt pain. There was only a serene emptiness, like someone who had finally finished a project that took years to complete. Because, in the end, his revenge was never the scandal. It was giving the truth the space it deserved. And let each consequence take its own course. No rush. No return. The impact of the video went far beyond what anyone could have predicted. Within hours, Daniel's recording went viral on social media, groups of colleagues and entire communities where he had worked professionally over the years. It was not a direct attack on Helena's image, but rather a manifest of pain contained in elegance, which made everything even more impactful. Many who watched didn't even know her name, but it was enough to watch the cutting serenity with which he revealed his story to understand the depth of the wound. The internet was divided between messages of support, admiration and heated debates about emotional justice, betrayal and dignity. Meanwhile, Helena spent her days secluded, at home, avoiding any type of contact. He deactivated social media, cancelled the classes he was still teaching, and refused invitations from his family. Not out of pride, but because she didn't know how to look into the eyes of someone who now saw her completely. The cruelest thing for her was not the external judgment, but the awareness that everything that happened was, in fact, a consequence of her own choices. All around her, relationships began to quietly unravel. Close friends began to leave, not out of direct rejection, but because they no longer knew how to position themselves in the face of what had happened. The parents, although they tried not to show it, looked with a certain discreet disappointment, as if something between them had also broken. The sister, always so close, now maintained a neutral tone in conversations, avoiding any deeper topics. It was as if everyone was afraid of causing a meltdown. Helena didn't argue, she didn't rebut, but inside, the emptiness was uncontrollable. She had lost more than one husband. She had lost the admiration of the people she loved most and, most importantly, she had lost the narrative she held about herself. For the first time in his life, he saw himself without the masks he had constructed with so much care. She was no longer seen as the sophisticated, sensitive and inspiring woman. She was the woman who destroyed her own house with her own hands. Over the next few days, she tried to rebuild her routine little by little, but nothing seemed to fit. Going to the market meant facing curious looks, crossing the street meant hearing whispers, entering the bookstore meant finding covers that seemed to mock your story. He opened the email just once and found messages from former students, some with words of sadness, others of compassion, few of direct censure. Even those who supported her could not erase the shadow that now followed her in silence. At a certain point, she thought about leaving the city, starting over somewhere else. But starting over required something she didn't yet have, courage to rebuild herself without shortcuts, without illusions. And no matter how painful it was, Helena knew she needed to stay there. She needed to go through that hell with her eyes open, without running away from the embers that she herself lit. Meanwhile, Daniel maintained an almost monastic routine. He rented a small house near a dam and started working remotely. He avoided unnecessary calls, refused interviews, ignored curious people. He was sought out by colleagues, journalists, and even other victims of emotionally abusive relationships who saw him as an unexpected symbol of strength and balance. But he didn't want to be a symbol of anything. He did not seek recognition or moral status. All he wanted was silence. Time to reorganize your life, not the material one, but the internal one. He discovered that, despite all the pain, he didn't feel hate. Yes, I felt an exposed wound, an emptiness where there used to be a home, a woman, a story. But I knew that I had to live with this emptiness until it became just space. He started walking around the dam every morning, writing small thoughts in old notebooks and, little by little, he freed himself from the image of a victim to recognize himself only as someone who survived what he didn't deserve. One rainy late afternoon, he received a letter. It was Helena's. Handwritten, in the same careful letters she used to leave him notes around the house in her early years. There was no explicit request for forgiveness, nor justifications. It was more of a confession of fragility, a belated recognition of the choices he made. He said that only now did he understand the value of his silence, the magnitude of his response. And that, if he wanted, she was willing to talk. Not to fix anything, because he knew that was impossible, but to face for the last time who she was with him. Daniel held the letter for long minutes, not knowing what to do with that gesture. I didn't feel anger, nor compassion. Above all, I felt exhaustion. But something inside him told him that maybe he needed to listen. Not for her. For him. They arranged to meet a few days later, in a discreet cafe, away from known eyes. She arrived early, sat at the table in the back, with her hair tied up simply, almost shyly. He entered, sat in front of her, and for a few minutes, silence reigned between the two. Neither of them knew where to start. Helena took the lead and began to speak with almost raw sincerity. He said that for a long time he believed that marriage would survive absence, small failures, monotony. Who never expected to find herself involved with another person, but when it happened, she preferred to lie rather than face her own dissatisfaction. He said it wasn't just about desire or need, but about feeling invisible. And instead of asking for help, he sought escape. Daniel listened to her without interrupting. The firm look, but without the hardness of before. At one point, he asked her what she expected from that conversation. Helena hesitated. He said nothing. That, for the first time, I expected nothing more than to be heard. And if he left there and never wanted to see her again, he would accept it in silence. Daniel was silent for long seconds. He said there was no right answer. That she had her reasons, but that choices had consequences. And that, as much as I understood her today as a human being, I could no longer love her as a woman. Not out of revenge, but because something had broken definitively. She nodded, her eyes moist. He said that, somehow, that was enough. That knowing that he had found peace, even far away from her, was the least he could wish for. They left the cafe with a strange, almost civil cordiality. There was no hug, no emotional goodbye. Just one last look. And in that look, a silent wave of definitive goodbye. In the following days, Helena resumed some classes, timidly but constantly. He changed his haircut, renovated his living room, removed all his old photos and donated half of his books. He created a self-reflection diary where he recorded his mistakes, fears and desires. For the first time, she faced herself without filters. It hurt. But it was necessary. Daniel, in turn, accepted an invitation to teach at a smaller university, returning to work with young architects. He rediscovered pleasure in teaching, in sharing experiences. He started going out more, meeting old friends, experiencing small moments that previously went unnoticed. One day, he met a woman at a lecture on urban planning and education. The conversation was simple, without intentions, but it left him with a calm curiosity. They exchanged sporadic emails, without rushing. He wasn't looking for love, but he was no longer afraid of it. And so, between silent reconstructions and new routes drawn, their lives took new directions. The pain was not completely gone, but it had transformed. And what once seemed like the end of everything, was now just the turning point. A crossing that, although arduous, would reveal an unexpected horizon. A point where, finally, there would be no more hidden truths. No secrets kept. Just life, as it really is. 6 months have passed since that definitive night, and while the world followed its usual rhythm, Daniel and Helena walked opposite paths, each facing the shadows they left in each other. None of it disappeared completely, but it turned into different layers of silence. Helena, now more introspective, decided to sell the house where so many memories resided. She told herself it was for practicality, but she knew she couldn't bear to walk through corridors where sentimental ghosts constantly whispered memories. The new house was a simple apartment, with less space, fewer windows, less past. She chose this way because, deep down, she didn't want any more walls that would remind her of how much she lost trying to maintain a facade. His life now consisted of teaching twice a week, taking care of a small vegetable garden on the balcony and attending weekly therapy sessions where, with great effort, he began to understand that not all failed love is born from evil, but all disrespect, once practiced, leads affection to collapse. She began to write letters to herself, which she did not send to anyone, but read aloud during sleepless nights. It was his way of rebuilding himself little by little, without an audience, without easy forgiveness, without the applause of before. I had learned, in the most painful way possible, that character is not measured by the number of beautiful words you say, but by the decisions you make when no one is looking. He no longer sought redemption in the eyes of others, nor in the mirror. I just wanted to move forward with some dignity, even if it was in ruins. One day, at the supermarket, she saw a couple hugging each other between the shelves and felt her chest hurt with the same intensity as when she woke up alone for the first time. I knew, at that moment, that even if he continued his life, he would never love anyone again the way he loved Daniel. And as contradictory as it was, she understood that perhaps he had been the only person to see her completely and still have tried to love her until the end. Daniel, in turn, found himself in new emotional territory. The relationship he was developing with Laura, the woman he met at the lecture months ago, moved with the lightness that only maturity allows. There was no rush, there were no empty promises, just sincere exchanges, long conversations and a respect that blossomed naturally. She didn't ask about the past, he didn't hide the scars. There was a silent complicity there, based on the understanding that both had already lived too much to allow themselves to be carried away by easy illusions. With her, Daniel rediscovered the pleasure of sharing everyday life, but without giving up on himself. He continued writing in his notebooks, now more frequently, filling pages with reflections on love, loss, the architecture of the soul. He became a regular guest in debates on emotional ethics, without ever using his story as a spectacle. He spoke lucidly, pointed out the signs of fragile relationships and encouraged the appreciation of dialogue before the collapse. He was applauded, yes, but he remained far from the pedestal. He knew he had done what he needed to do, not to get revenge, but to preserve his integrity. And that was enough. One day, Laura invited him to dinner with her parents. It was a symbolic gesture, but full of weight. He accepted. He dressed as he did in ancient times, with that discreet elegance that characterized him. Upon arriving at the house, he was greeted with affection, and amid light conversations, spontaneous laughter and family stories, he realized that he was, in fact, at peace. There were no traces of the old resentment, no traces of bitterness. Just a serene feeling that everything he had experienced had prepared him for that moment. When Laura held his hand during dinner, he felt that touch carried no weight, no guilt, just presence. And that was new. It was liberating. Months later, Daniel received an unusual invitation. The foundation he had created in his mother's honor was about to open its first physical location, and the board wanted him to give the opening speech. He hesitated. He didn't like the idea of exposing his pain publicly, but he understood that this was a chance to close a cycle. He took the stage in front of an emotional audience and spoke calmly. He said the pain didn't define him, but it refined him. That the betrayal he suffered was not an end, but a passage. And that, instead of retaliating with destruction, he chose to transform pain into a collective gesture of healing. At the end, he received a standing ovation. And for the first time, he felt proud of everything he overcame without having to hurt anyone. Helena watched the speech online. Alone, in the dark, with my laptop on my lap. He cried. Not out of sadness, but out of recognition. She knew she would never have his respect again, but at that moment, she understood that even after everything, he was still, in some way, the greatest love of her life. Not out of nostalgia for what they were, but out of admiration for what he became. And that, ironically, was his biggest lesson. Time passed. Both followed different paths. Helena, more reserved, dedicated herself to helping other women who had experienced similar traumas, but from her own pain. Daniel, expanding the foundation's operations, writing, living, and, above all, allowing himself to love again with the lightness of someone who has already known the abyss and chosen to walk on the surface. In the end, everyone reaped exactly what they sowed. Not because of destiny's revenge, but because life, in its silent wisdom, returns with precision what we give to it. And in this story, where betrayal tried to be the protagonist, it was dignity that triumphed. Helena paid the price for her own omission. Daniel reaped peace for having done what few would have the courage to do, love until the end, and when the end came, let go, with truth. Now we want to hear from you. What did you think of this story? Comment below, we really want to know your opinion. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications and share with those who need to reflect on the value of respect in relationships. Always remember, this channel does not support, under any circumstances, any type of betrayal. Here, we tell stories to show that every choice has consequences, and that loyalty is still the foundation of any true love. Until the next story.